Okay, thank you all for asking me to come. I'm from the Charlottesville area tree stewards. And what we do is that we are concerned about improving the tree canopy in Charlottesville area and adjacent counties. So for instance, here in Fluvanna, we have been working with Walter Hussey over at Pleasant Grove. Remember, he put those wildlife meadows out, and then he ringed them with trees. So we've been coming out and helping him maintain those trees. We've been to Crozet, we've also been to Waynesboro, so we go a variety of different places. We're an entirely volunteer group. We have about 170 volunteer members who are dues paying, but we have basically 60 people who actually do a lot of work. Okay, now, we do a wide variety of things. As you can see from my little triptych over there, we do education. This is part of our education program that we do. If you go to our website, we have seminars that we give throughout the year, Zoom sessions that are free. And we talk about how to plant trees, how to select trees, how to prune trees, how to identify invasive plants and how to control them. We have a 4-season time where one of our members talks about how to identify trees at different seasons of the year. And she also talks about other topics. So please check our website to look under the events section. You'll be able to see a lot of these things are free for you to go to. We also reach out to some of the elementary schools and have been starting a program. Margie Giuliani is one of the people who has been working on going to have a tree ranger group at one of the elementary schools. This is our first time with them. We also do tree walks. We take you on walks at different parks, etc., and talk to you about the trees that are in there. And like next Friday and Saturday, I'm doing a tree walk at Dardentow Park in Charlottesville area. So we have a wide variety of educational components where we go out and interact with people. I'm the chairman of the projects committee, and I think that's the best part of what we do. We go out there and we work, right, Helen? She knows full well about that. And what we do, again, it's like a seasonal thing. In the wintertime, we have just basically finished doing pruning. We prune the trees that we have planted. We also go to the parks, recreation. They often ask us to go to their areas and prune trees. There was a highway that was put in Charlottesville area called Berkmar Drive, and they planted 1,000 trees, and we've pruned all of them. So we're pretty busy on that sort of stuff. Now we're going to do some invasives control. So we want to try to get to the buggers before they get to be too big. And we also, as it gets warmer, we'll be doing weeding and mulching of the plantings that we have done and also assist the parks and recreation people. And in the fall is the time we do our tree planting. And for the last several years, we've planted between 70 and 80, like 1 to 2 diameter trees. So we've had a major impact on many of the places around here. So this is what we do. It's a great group of people, very enthusiastic, and we have a lot of fun when we do our projects. So if you're interested in becoming a tree steward, we have a training program that's given in the fall. It's a hybrid course. It's a combination of online lectures and other presentations, and then every other week we have it hands-on. So we go for about 3 hours and do hands-on stuff. So it's been working out quite well, and it's a lot of fun. So I suggest you go and come to it. Now, this lecture that I'm giving you here today, Trees and Wildlife, is one of the lectures that I have in that program. So to give you an idea of like what we do and how we handle it. Okay? All right. So, we all know about the importance of trees with respect to CO2 control, right? You all know about the importance of trees to cooling down your immediate environment. Right? Got trees in your yard, it's a lot cooler than when you don't have the trees. And in our neighborhoods, it's also extremely important to have that. We also know, you may or may not be as aware of the fact that trees are also very important for air pollution control because they absorb many of the toxins that are in the air. And they also absorb many of the particulate matter that comes around from burnings and from cars and stuff like that. It gets on the trees and therefore doesn't get in our air. So these trees are important there. And finally, trees are extremely important for controlling water runoff and therefore pollution of our waterways. So these are all things that we do. Now, the other thing is trees are important for wildlife. So one of the things, if you've been paying attention, is everybody's been talking about the fact that many of our species, our fellow earthlings, are starting to disappear. So we're losing individual species of animals. We are also losing the numbers of the species. The species that are here are decreasing markedly in numbers. And you can see here, one of the things is fairly particular with respect to the birds. Now, one of the things, though, is that as bad as it is for our vertebrate species, it is 10 times worse for our invertebrate species. And this are insects, moths, butterflies, etc. And part of the reasons why we are losing them is the indiscriminate use of insecticides. And they are essential, as we will see. Insects are absolutely essential for the survival of many of our vertebrate species. So we're going to go and talk about that. And so what has happened? What is the primary cost? Well, the primary change is, of course, climate control. You know, the changing climate will force animals to have to go other places. And then the other thing is urbanization and agricultural intensification. It's destroying the native habitat. And as a result of that, these animals have no place to go. So what you do is you look in your neighborhood. This is my neighborhood. This is one neighbor. He's got 5 acres of grass, of lawn. Okay? It's a dead zone. Nothing grows there. Every week, the lawnmowers come along and spew gas, make noise, and nothing grows. His immediate neighbor said, I'm not going to spend money on that sort of stuff. And what he did instead was put in this meadow. And this meadow, throughout the year, the spring, summer, and fall, is just loaded with flowers, et cetera, and grasses, and is loaded with insects. And because the insects are there, we have birds there, we have other small mammals that are around, flitting around and getting food and stuff like that. So this is habitat. This is what's going to be able to enable our species to be able to survive and grow. But this is not just the only habitat you want to get. You also want to have habitats such as your woodlands areas. It's a different habitat, but it is just as important. And you often forget about the importance of the waterways and the habitat around the waterways. So these are all habitats that we're going to kind of review as we go along. Okay, so you kind of already heard from Jean about what habitat is. This is the National Wildlife Federation, and what they want to do is, if you're going to say you have wildlife habitat in your yard, you have to make sure you have a source of water, a source of food. You have to have cover and protection. And cover and protection is to protect the animals not just from adverse weather effects, but also to protect them from predators, so that their young are not going to be out there where they can get predated upon. So it's important for that. And then finally, you have to have enough space and range for them. You don't want them to be overcrowded, but you also want them to have enough of them around so they can breed, right? Because the purpose is to propagate the species. Well, where do trees fit into this situation? Trees basically provide wildlife with cover and with food. And the native trees are absolutely essential for the survival of our native species. The species have co-evolved with the native plants. Those are the plants that they feed upon. Those are the plants that provide sources for food. Non-native plants are not going to be eaten by our native animals, and therefore they're not going to be a source of food for them. So you want to have native plants. And the greater the diversity of the native plants that you plant in your yard, as you could probably figure out, the greater the diversity of species that you're going to be bringing into your yard. So diversity does work. It's very important. So we understand about the importance of native plants, right? Everybody knows the monarch butterfly story, right? The adult monarch butterfly does not need a milkweed plant in order to survive. It can get nectar from any plant. But it is the caterpillar. The caterpillar has to be on milkweed plants. If she lays her eggs on a plant other than a milkweed, when that caterpillar comes out, it will die, because it cannot eat and cannot survive on anything other than milkweed. So that's why it's important that we are advocating for people to plant milkweed in their yards to be able to attract the monarch butterflies, so they then can have caterpillars that can then grow to become more monarch butterflies. Now here's a story about where a tree situation fits into that too. Longleaf pine. Have you ever seen longleaf pine? Longleaf pine, the term longleaf really is true, because those pine needles are about a foot long. And way back when, before the we were colonized, the longleaf pine extended from Virginia to Texas, all along the coastal plains. And it was 90 million acres of these trees. And over time, what happened is that the settlers found out that this wood was great for making boats. Also, the pine, the tar from this tree was great for making boats. So they did a great job of knocking down all these forests to put them in. The other thing is that the longleaf pine depends upon forest fires. When it starts growing, it looks like a tuft of grass. It takes 7 years before it goes from a tuft of grass to start becoming a pine tree. And so if you have a canopy that covers it up, it doesn't get the sunlight, it doesn't grow. So it's absolutely essential to have forest fires. And what have we been doing for centuries now? Preventing forest fires. And as a result, that's another reason why the longleaf pine has not survived. So it was declared an endangered pine tree. And when this pine tree was endangered, it also found out that this particular woodpecker, the red cockaded woodpecker, was the one that loved to live in this particular longleaf pine tree. One of the reasons being is that it was easy for them to make a nest in this particular tree because the inside of that tree would get mushy from this fungus that commonly found, and they could make their nest there. The other thing is, remember I was telling you about the tar that comes out? Well, the tar would come out and ooze around the edges of the nest, and it would repel snakes. So it keeps snakes from going into the nest and eating the babies or the eggs. So this association of this particular woodpecker, as the pine trees disappeared, the longleaf pine disappeared, they started to disappear. There is a major movement now in planting these back again and trying to revive this longleaf pine. It's a beautiful tree. It's a beautiful tree, but it takes a long time before you actually see a tree. It's fascinating. So let's think about trees and wildlife, and you can look at it in a variety of different ways. Well, let's look at a tree. And if you look at a tree, you have the canopy, you have branches and trunks, and you have the forest floor. And those are actually 3 different habitats. Animals are found each in the different places. And like Peter Wohlenben in his book, The Hidden Life of Trees, he says, think about a tree as a community project, okay? You have a diversity of animals and people in there. And the canopy is a place where you're going to have basically birds who are going to be up flitting around, making nests, eating insects, eating fruit that might be up in the canopy. You're going to have your squirrels running around in there too. They also eat the insects and nuts and make their little nests or live in cavities within these trees. And then you also can have various types of reptiles and amphibians that would be moving up and down the branches into the tree and down to the ground. People often don't realize the importance of the forest floor. The forest floor is very important. And the reason being that if you don't interfere with the tree drops all its leaves, right? And by having that down there, it's very high organic material down below. And when the tree does photosynthesis, it takes CO2 in and releases oxygen, but it also releases water. And as a result of that, the area immediately underneath the tree is going to be cooler and moister than on where the tree is not. And that makes it an ideal place. The high organic material and the moisture makes it an ideal place for reptiles and particularly for amphibians. It's also a great place for worms and bugs and everything else that to grow. And that will bring the other animals down to the forest floor. So if you look at a tree, we have different habitats. But we never have a tree singly by itself. In the normal situation of when you have an open space and Mother Nature comes in, she starts filling the void, right? And what she does is she'll have forbs growing in there, and then she starts getting bushes and trees, understory trees, and then finally she gets the larger canopy trees. And this is sort of like what you want to have in a forested area. This is a meadow over here. Then you're going to have what they often refer to as the soft border or the vital edge. And this is made up of bushes and vines and understory trees. Okay, then behind that you have the canopy trees. So again, that's a gradation, different habitats. It'll attract different animals. So like in the meadow over there, you can have a lot of insects. You can have a lot of small rodents that'll be running around eating the seeds and eating the insects that are in there. You can have rabbits that would be going and building their nests in the understory area there, that soft border, but they will go out and they will feed on the grasses and the seeds that are in the meadow. Then similarly to that, you can have larger animals do that. For instance, our deer. The deer will go into under the canopy tree area there to be protected during the day, but at night and at dusk and all that, they will come out and they'll want to feed. Again, they will browse on the understory in the bushes, or they will go out and they will feed on the grasses. And then, of course, we're going to have birds and squirrels up in the canopy trees and the understory trees. So it's a very active place. There's lots of animals there. And if you have lots of animals in there, you're going to have predators, right? So you have a great diversity of species because you have a diversity of plants and habitats in this area. So we're talking about trees providing protection. Okay, how do they do that? Well, their protection is, as I said before, hot and cold, rain and snow, and predators. And they can make their homes. Many of our animals are cavity dwellers, where they will go into holes in trees, both live and dead trees, where they will make their nests. And then there are others who make nests that are on the branches of the trees, etc. Then there are certain animals that will just hang out in trees. Many of the nocturnal animals will often tend to go up into the trees during the day and then come down at night. And then finally, there are nursery trees. When you talk about your bears, we talk about nursery trees. So here's a nest in my neighbor's yard. It's a cardinal nest, and you can see the leaves are above it. So it provides protection from the sun and the rain, etc. There's also leaves underneath, branches underneath it. So it's protected above from adverse weather. It's also protected from predators that might be flying around, like crows and blue jays who will attack baby birds. And it also is protected from below, so like raccoons and snakes may not see the nest and want to go up and take care of it. So this is a protection both from adverse weather and from predators. Now, what happens in wintertime with a deciduous tree like that? The leaves are all gone, right? So where do they get their protection? This is where your evergreen trees come in. The evergreen trees are very important sources of protection for the animals in the wintertime. And so if you want to have a four-season yard, you should plant some evergreen trees because they're going to be important as sources of protection for the animals in the winter. So this little robin, as you can see, took the evergreen needles and made a nest from them. So they're very effective at that. I had a little wren come into my garage and do something similar. So cavity dwellers, all sizes of animals will make cavities in living and dead trees where they will raise their young, as you can see here. Pileated woodpeckers and raccoons all the way down to little chickadees. And mammals. Bats like to live in trees too. Usually the bats that are found in colonies are the ones who will make it into holes of the trees. So they all can be inside there. But there are some bats who tend to be single bats. And they often will be found underneath the bark of both dead trees and some trees that exfoliate their bark. So that's a good place for them to hide. And when we think about animals in trees, always think about squirrels, right? And this little guy is sticking his head, it has a nest inside this particular tree. It's probably the best thing for them because it's good insulation. But they also make a nest what's called a dray. They will weave different branches and stuff together and then put grass and leaves in it. So if you look out your yard and you see a squirrel going around and it's stuffing its mouth with leaves, it's going to take those leaves and pick it up and make its dray. And you usually don't see them effectively until like the wintertime when all the leaves are gone and you can see them. And the biggest ones are usually for the winter or for nurseries where you have a mom raising her babies. And like I say, they also like to hang out. Possums, who are nocturnal, will be up in the trees, and raccoons. I lived in a town on the edges of the Beltway in DC, and it was an old neighborhood, so we had these great old oak trees, and it was not uncommon to look up to be able to see some raccoons up there hanging out. Okay, bears. Nursery trees. This is a bear. I looked outside of my garage door one day, and there was this mama out there eating some peanuts that I had put out for some squirrels that come by. And so I was talking to her, and I opened up the door, not very wide, just enough for me. And I was talking to them, and the babies got really scared, and they ran down the hill over here and climbed up an oak tree, just like these little guys did. Mom, on the other hand, just kind of gave me a look and said, what's your problem? And she then ate a few more peanuts, and then she went down and walked by the tree and grunted at them, and the 3 came down and the 4 of them went away. So they all had a good time. So those are your nursery trees. Raccoons will do this, and sometimes even possums will do this with their babies. So our trees are also fantastic for insects. And we'll see a little bit more detail about them. And so there are insects on the surface of the trees, in the bark. You know what nuthatches are? Those little birds that go upside down and running up and down the trees, and they're looking for insects that are inside the bark over there. And all these animals will go and want to eat the insects. And of course, the woodpeckers are going to eat not only the wood insects that are on the outside, but also the insects that are inside. And so they'll be making the holes in the various trees so they can go and get them. Now, the forest floor, as I mentioned before, is also very, very important. So we had our canopy, we had our branches, our trunk, and now we have our forest floor. It's a great place for insects to grow, and it then makes a great place for these animals to live. And the amphibians love the moist environment. And you want to have a nice area like here. This is part of my woods where the deer haven't gotten too badly, but it has, you can see we have the canopy trees, we have understory trees, there's a lot of debris, a lot of organic material. That's an ideal situation for animals to live in. And a little wren, like here, was looking around, flicking the leaves up to get to the insects that are underneath. And then in the fall, you can have the turkeys coming along to eat acorns. It's a great place for reptiles, and particularly very important for amphibians, where they need, again, the moisture that comes from the tree and keep that environment nice and moist for them. Because remember, they breathe through their skin. So they have to have a moist environment. So that was shelter and an appropriate environment to live in. What about food? Well, trees provide food in these different ways. One, they provide insects. They also provide nectar. And then we have soft mast, which is berries and fruits, and then hard mast, which are nuts. So trees provide a great diversity of food for our wildlife. And here's a diagram showing you how trees interact with the wildlife. And you can see here trees are important for birds, mammals, and amphibians, as we were talking. They also are very important for fish. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But trees also are very important for insects. And insects, in turn, are very important for all of our vertebrate species. Indeed, as E.O. Wilson, a renowned biologist, said, insects are the little things that run the world. And I said, as I mentioned, they're an important source of food for birds and animals. And again, our native insects depend on our native plants. And many of our insects are specific to a particular plant, just like the monarch butterfly was. This is one situation. Any of you guys have pawpaws in your yard? Pawpaw trees are great trees if you don't want the deer to bother them. Deer do not eat pawpaws. And the reason why they don't is because the leaves of these trees, it's a nice tree, and it's got a lovely little flower which looks like a rosette, it looks like a rose. And they make fruit. And the pawpaw fruit was actually one of Thomas Jefferson's favorite fruit. It's fascinating. But anyway, the leaves contain this compound, acetogens, which make it very bitter. And that's why the deer don't eat it. It tastes blah. Now, the zebra-tail swallow, the zebra swallowtail, basically lays its eggs on the pawpaw plant, and only the pawpaw plant. And its larvae, its caterpillars, you can see are very distinctive. And when they eat the leaves, that acidogens get inside them. And because of that stuff being in them, if a bird comes and eats it, it's going to spit it out because it tastes terrible. And it's so distinctive, it's not going to go and eat those again. So it helps ensure the survival of that particular butterfly, because the larvae are not going to be eaten by the birds because the birds recognize it as being something that doesn't taste good. So, now who eats insects? We all know about our insectivorous animals, the bats, which we love, and the other insectivorous birds. And then we have our reptiles and amphibians who also eat insects. But mammals love to eat insects too. This is the year of the cicada, right? The squirrels are going to go crazy eating cicadas. They love to eat cicadas. It's going to be a great year for them. And so they'll eat all kinds of bugs. They eat bugs, particularly a lot of the baby squirrels when they first come out. They're running up and down along the branches and stuff like that, trying to find food. And if they find an insect, they stick it in their mouth, just like a typical kid, right? Everything they see, they put in their mouth. And bears also love to eat the larval stages of termites and carpenter ants. So if you go in the woods and you see a tree, a downed tree that has been like shredded apart, probably was by a bear, because they want to go and get those larval stages that are in there. So, now, Jean kind of mentioned the importance of caterpillars in all for songbirds. As you can see here, 96% of our songbirds, our terrestrial birds, feed their babies caterpillars. So, if we don't have caterpillars, you're not going to have songbirds. So we got to keep them going. And this is true, not just of insectivorous birds, but also seed-eating birds, like that sparrow over there. How many larvae can they possibly need? How many caterpillars can they possibly need, right? Well, somebody did a study on chickadees. Chickadees generally have anywhere from 3 to 5 babies in a nest. Mom and pop chickadee will feed their babies between 350 to 570 caterpillars a day. And you thought taking care of your kids was exhausting. Can you imagine how much flying around they have to do to find all these caterpillars? And then, of course, they feed them for potentially 21 to 22 days. So it ends up being thousands of caterpillars. And that's just one nest of chickadees. What about the other birds? So where do we get all these caterpillars? Well, this is where trees fit in. Trees are a very important source of places for caterpillars. This is a table from Doug Tallamy, who is the guru with respect to wildlife and trees. And he has a listing here of the number of species of Lepidoptera, which are butterflies and moths, that are supported by these various types of trees. And the greater the number of species you have, the more likely you're going to be able to have caterpillars present. So you have the great, and you can see here that the oak tree is very important. A lot of the fruit trees, as you could imagine, are very important sources for caterpillars. But it's kind of surprising to think about the fact that pine trees, alder, spruce, even evergreens are important sources for homes for these caterpillars. Now, if I put up a tree like a zelkova, the number of species would be 0. The wild trees, the non-native trees, do not support any of our insects. So if you want to have birds, you have to have native trees so you can support the butterflies that they need. Now, an interesting thing about insects and woodpeckers is that they also, the woodpeckers, sapsuckers, if you go and see trees that have a lateral row of, horizontal row of holes in it, that's a sapsucker. And what they do is they go in there and they make a hole, and they're going into the living part of the tree, which is immediately under the bark, and they eat the canby in there and eat the sap that's in there. Now, obviously, when they make these holes, sometimes it continues to ooze the sap. And when it oozes the sap like that, the insects will come to eat the sugar, And then the woodpeckers come back and they eat the insects. So they do it in a variety of different ways. And they have often found that even hummingbirds will also come and drink the sap that's from these sapsucker holes. So it works out quite well, a little bit of symbiosis in there. Tree blossoms, nectar, pollinators. This is a serviceberry up here. This is viburnum. You know, those come out pretty early, right? The serviceberries are early. The red buds come early. Actually, you can have flowers there before many of the flowering plants that are on the ground are going to be there. So these are a very important source of nectar for the migrating insects that are coming up and then ones that are waking up. So where you have tree blossoms, you're going to have tree fruit, right? And the listing on the left is some of the more common trees that produce fruits. And if you look at it, you can see that they are basically spring, summer, fall, right? So you have often mulberries are some of the first ones to have berries in the springtime, and then crab apples are ones that you're going to see later on in the fall. And that's what you would like to do in your yards if you want to bring in food for your animals, is to have a 4-season or a 3-season set of plants out there, so there's always going to be food on the table. You know, there's food on the table, they will come. And the mulberry tree in particular is very important in the springtime. It is basically there for over 40 species of birds. Squirrels, chipmunks, all of them will eat the berries. The deer will eat the berries, and we eat the berries too, right? Mulberry trees, they're very important. And then in the fall, your crab apples, which are going to be eaten by the animals, both small and larger birds. So it's a very good source of food. And then finally in the winter, you're going to have your holly berries as well as your dogwood berries. Eastern red cedars, you know, the blueberries that they have all over them, that's a great source of food for the fall for many of our birds. And they seem to know when they're ripe. I had a neighbor who had an eastern red cedar tree. It was bigger than, it'd be taller than this building here, so it was huge. And as a result of that, it was loaded. It was practically blue in color. It had so many berries. And I was wondering for when they were going to start to be eaten. And it was like, all of a sudden, 3-day period, all the berries disappeared because all the birds they seemed to know it was ripe. And they went and finished it all off. So it's very important. Eastern red cedars are good. If you want to have cedar waxwing birds in your yard, put eastern red cedars in there. They are particularly attracted to that. And remember, this is a female tree. There's male trees and female trees, and only the female tree will have the fruit on it. So hard mass, which are nuts, these are beech nuts. You may or may not have ever seen a beech nut. This is a very popular seed for the animals because it's very high in fat. They appear in the summertime. They're not a fall fruit. They're really a summer fruit. And we have a large number of beech trees, and they don't last long. Everybody goes and eats them really quickly. But usually when we think about nuts, hard nuts on trees, we think about acorns. Now, the oak family has red oaks and white oaks. Okay, they're two different families. The white oak acorn is very low in tannins, which makes it sweet, versus the red oak acorns, which tend to be a little bit more bitter. So as you can imagine, when the squirrels are gathering these nuts together, you're going to eat the ones that taste best first, right? So they often eat them first. And that works out, and they kind of store the red oak acorns more frequently. And that works out pretty well, because if you take a white oak acorn from the fall and put it in the ground, it sprouts almost immediately. So like if in late fall you'll see little oak trees coming up, most likely there are white oak acorns. The red oak acorn, however, will not sprout until the following spring. So it makes sense for the squirrels to keep the red oaks for storage, because they're not going to have a tree in there. They're going to have a nut that they can eat. So it works out quite well. Now, squirrels will obviously bury their nuts. Animals are very good about helping distribute them. But if you look and watch them, they don't go too far from the immediate area. They don't great distances. So it ends up being, if an oak tree wants to move further, it actually depends on blue jays. Blue jays will take acorns and go a couple miles away and then plant the acorns. So they're very good about distributing the acorns in a greater diversity area. It is often said that if you see an oak tree in the middle of a pasture, it probably was planted by a blue jay. And some animals use acorns as a primary source of food for bulking up, our bears and our deer. So the acorns are extremely important. And even little guys like acorns, right? Walnuts and hickory nuts, really thick shells. Okay, how do the animals get through that? How many can break through that? Well, it's the squirrels. The squirrels eat through those things, break open the shells, and they're sloppy eaters. They only eat like half of it. They drop it down. I've rehabbed squirrels, and I can tell you they're messy eaters. And so you can have all these half-eaten nuts, and all the other animals come along and take them. So it works out quite well. Nothing goes to waste with Mother Nature, right? And then our pine cones are an important source of food for the winter for our animals. Now, we often don't think about the importance of trees for wildlife, aquatic wildlife. And as I mentioned before, they're very important. Having a riparian buffer, trees along a stream edge is very important because the waters that come down into the streams may be passing over lawns that have fertilizer on them, insecticides, herbicides on them. You may have farmland, which could have manure, could have fertilizer and all sorts, that sort of stuff. And there's also silt that comes down. These riparian buffers, which is a combination of trees and bushes, et cetera, help screen that silt from getting into the streams, and therefore keeping the streams cleaner than they would if we didn't have these buffers in there. And it ends up being a very important source. So you can see here, this waterway does not get much silt inside of it for the most part, and because of all the trees and bushes along the side. And there are specific birds and other animals that live in this area here. They make their nests in these understory trees, and they also will eat some of what's on it. This is an alder bush, an alder tree, and these are the male catkins, and this is the female cones, and they will eat them. The birds will eat them, squirrels will eat them, so it's a good source of food for them. The other reason, and the important reason for having trees and stuff around your waterways, is that they will keep the waterways cool. Our aquatic species are used to cold water in this part of the country. They do not like hot water. And so if it gets too hot, their metabolism gets screwed up and they will die. The other thing is that when the water gets hot, the oxygen off-gasses, and then they will be deprived of oxygen. So cool areas around your waterways are very important for keeping them alive. The other thing is that this looks like a bloody mess, right? Over here, we've got these branches and stuff in there, and you can imagine there's leaves in there. You know, is that good? It actually is very good, because the branches and stuff down there provide shelter for the fish and other aquatic species that are in there from being predated upon by predators, such as herons and all that. And the leaves that fall into the stream there will start to rot, and that ends up being food for the aquatic invertebrates that live in the stream. And these aquatic invertebrates that live in the stream are the source of food for fish. So you have to have that in there, and they provide the nutrients for those animals inside there. Works out quite well. And in fact, you know the Rivanna Conservation Alliance group? Have they ever been down here? That's a good group. They're very concerned about waterways. And they assess waterways by determining the number and the diversity of the species of these aquatic invertebrates that are in the water. That's a measurement of stream health. So you can see they're very important for stream health. And of course, when trees fall into water, it's a great place for our reptiles to live, so they can then go and get the fish, et cetera, that's living in there. Now, we talked about live trees. Let's talk about dead trees. Dead trees are as important as for survival of species throughout our forests and our vertebrate species. And you can see here from Wallen Men, 6,000 species of plants and animals depend on dead wood for sources. And I like this comment by Haskell: death decenters the tree's life, but does not end it. So even though the tree is dead, it continues to be important. And part of this is again, even a dead tree at different times provides a different habitat. Okay, you got a dead tree, right? Its branches start to fall off, and it starts to rot, and that's called a snag. It is often said you should have on an acre of land at least 5 snags to address some of the needs that are there. And these snags are going to have insects inside of them, carpenter ants, termites, bark beetles, beetles inside of them that will be eating the wood. And as a result of that, it's going to bring in woodpeckers who are going to come in there and make holes. And when they make holes to go and get these things, the holes are then formed or enable other birds and stuff to make nests. So it works out quite well there. And of course, if you have a tree with a branch like that, a dead tree, it's a great place for perches, right? Particularly for our predator animals. Our predator birds can go up there and get a good view, right? And it's interesting, the people out in the arboristry group out in the Northeast actually is advocating for snags. When these arborists go out there and cut down a tree, if you've got a tree in your backyard you're worried about, what is the primary parts of that tree that worries you the most? The trunk or the branches? Most likely the branches, right? They're going to fall down on something and hurt something. So what they recommend doing is they go out and they cut down all those branches, but they leave part of the trunk, 20, 30 feet, depending on where you are. You want to make sure it's not going to hit anything if it falls down. And what they do is they then cut up the end. So one, it's a good place for the birds to perch, but it also allows water to get down into that tree to help it rot. And then they even make this little thing here where they make a cut up, cut down with the chainsaw, make a cut horizontal, and they make this as like a little drawer that moves back and forth, and they make a hole in the center, and then they make this little hole. So it's a ready-made nest for a bird to go and then habitat in it. And they all have signs. They make signs that you can put next to your snag saying it's a wildlife habitat. So your neighbors don't think you're cheap, okay? But you didn't want to get it cut down. So and they would come every year, check to make sure that the tree is not going to be a hazard. So I think that's, fantastic for those group. So a tree is a snag when it's upright. Fallen tree falls down. It's also very important. Animals will walk along that tree that's down there. It's a highway. It keeps them from getting near the ticks that are on the ground. They can avoid it. Again, termites, ants, and beetles are going to be all over it, eating off it. Amphibians, reptiles, and groundhogs will be found burrowing underneath it, as this little snake was. And some of these trees will hollow out and become homes for possums and raccoons. And it's also a nursery for trees and bushes. The rotting tree will then become a source of nutrients for trees and bushes to grow on. So the trees are very important. Down trees are very important, and let them grow, let them stay there. Brush piles. What do we do when we cut down branches and stuff? You put them through a chipper, right? Get it all out and then use it somewhere. Well, actually, brush piles are very effective places. It's another habitat. This is my house up here, and I had a bunch of trees that had dropped a whole bunch of branches, so I made this brush pile. And it should be systematic. You put it, and then you put trees this way and trees that way. You put big logs on the bottom, layer it. And as a result of that, it's a haven for animals to get away from adverse weather effects. And also, it's a great place for them to hide. And it is full of insects. And since it's full of insects, it's going to be full of birds, et cetera. And I was actually amazed at the number of birds that I saw coming in and out of that brush pile that I made. And I just keep adding to it every year. It's getting bigger and bigger. And the Virginia Department of Forestry actually has a brochure you could get to talk about how to make brush piles. So there's a lot of information out there saying the importance of it. And if you make a brush pile, they will come. These are some possums that we rehabbed, and I wanted to get them used to living in trees and branches and stuff, so I made that brush pile for them. And they loved it. They would sleep in it during the day. So, trees and wildlife. Trees nurture wildlife throughout their life, and even when they're dead. If you want to have a wildlife-friendly habitat in and around your area, you want to try to establish a 4-season food web if you can. native plants, native plants, native plants. These are what you want to have. And have a diversity of flora will mean you'll have a diversity of fauna coming to visit. So what can we do? Get rid of the lawns, okay? Or minimize them. I noticed when I was driving around here, a lot of the homes don't have lawns in them. It's a good idea. Now you can stop mowing and let succession take place, or make a meadow, whatever you want. Plant trees and shrubs, like here, so we can have a nice soft buffer. And if you're going to plant them, try to plant trees and bushes that have mast, that provide either soft mast or hard mast. You know, you'll have flowers and it'll look pretty, and then you have berries, which will attract animals. Keep your deadwood, your snags, your down trees. And, you know, there's a mantra that's going around now. Plant trees, plant trees, plant trees, plant trees, plant trees. Yes, plant trees. But a young sapling is going to take 30 to 40 years before it's going to be really productive and helping us in so many ways. So not only is it important to plant trees, but it is just as important to protect the trees that we do have. Let's keep our older trees. They're doing a fantastic job. Let's help them continue to do that job. And we need to educate ourselves and our friends and neighbors. This is my yard. I live in the middle of 19 acres of woods, but even so, my yard is full of planting with other things. I have it in there. So these are some of the references, and I have some of the books out there on the table that you might find to be helpful. One of the things that is, this was a program. It was a series of seminars that I went to that was put together by the extension programs in Maryland and Virginia. And they have this little workbook that you could get, and it's just delightful about telling you how to assess what you have and then determine what you could do to make your yard even more friendly to wildlife. So please feel free to come and take a look at my books and see which ones you might want. And thank you very much for your attention.
Question, please.